All right, so let's talk about some Cestoideae. So these are going to be our tapeworms. So now these are internal parasitic flatworms, and these are actually the most specialized of all the flatworms. They're actually very highly specialized. One of the things that we need to know about them is they do not have any type of digestive tract. Their method of getting nutrition is simple diffusion from the nutrients in your body straight into them. So we've all heard of people having tapeworms before, or the concept of people having tapeworms before. They can actually get pretty long because our digestive tract is actually pretty long. So they can be anywhere from 1 millimeter up to 25 meters. So that's 75 feet in length, depending on what species they end up in as a final host. So because they are highly specialized, there is 4 anatomical features we're going to go over that they have to help them survive inside your gut. So the first one is the scolex and the proglottis. So the scolex is essentially, it's just a it's a region on the interior. It kind of looks like a head, but it's not really a head. But it's armed with suckers, and sometimes it'll have little hooks. But it uses those suckers to be able to attach to the wall of the digestive tract to keep it from being pushed through when nutrients or whenever your digestive food comes past. And then right behind that, you'll have an area that's called the neck, and then at the end of the neck, there's an area. There's a bunch of different repeating segments called a proglottis. So proglottis are just it's the long strip that falls behind the scolex, and again, it's just many repeating segments. Each segment is essentially just reproductive parts. It's egg production and sperm production. As again, I mentioned there's the scolex and then there's the neck. The neck starts producing the proglottis, and then it will produce another one behind it, which pushes the first one down, and so forth and so on to make the length of the tapeworm. As the proglottis get larger, they get more mature, and then they start egg production and they start sperm production. It's not uncommon for these to actually fertilize themselves. A lot of the eggs will be removed or released as they are fertilized, but for the most part, as the older sections of the proglottis that are further down mature, they'll actually break off, and then simply we just poop them out, and it goes into the water. And now the eggs are in water and they can start their life cycle to find a new host. Now, because they live inside of a digestive tract, the next 2 features are simply designed to help them to keep themselves from being digested by our digestive system. So they have the tegument and the cuticle. So essentially, a tegument is a layer of cells that covers the outside of the worm and helps keep them, the digestive enzymes from getting to them and from being able to break down their body. Now, over that, they actually have an extra layer called a cuticle. The cuticle it's not cells, so it's non-cellular, and it's just a protective coating that's found across them, which again just helps them from being broken down by our digestive system. So again, like for example in humans, one of these things would actually, here's the scolex, this whole area, here's some hooks, and here's the suckers, here's the neck I mentioned, and then here's the proglottis. As the proglottis is start to move down and they start to mature. As they mature, they start producing egg and sperm, and then that is what they're going to use to fertilize themselves and other segments. And then as they break off, they will get flushed out and back into water where they'll start their life cycle. But one of these crawls up inside of you, and what it does, it will go, in humans usually it likes to go in our large intestines, or excuse me, go up through our large intestines into our small intestines and right below an area called the duodenum, or right below the duodenum, which is the area where your stomach empties into your small intestines, because that is the area where there has the highest concentration of nutrition in the digestive liquids that are coming in. So it simply just absorbs the nutrients before we can. Not all of it, we'll still get some, but people who have tapeworms will lose weight and they'll become anemic very quickly because their body's not able to get as much nutrition as it needs because it's all being sucked up by this flatworm. So here's an example of some of the proglottises. You could see, this is taken on a microscope. You can see like the uterus. Here's the sperm duct. Here's the genital pore. You can see the testes and a clump of ovaries, and that exists in each segment. So the entire length of it, it looks like the body of the worm. It's not. It's just massive reproductive segments to make more and more of themselves. So there are 5 different tapeworms that we generally need to worry about. I'm not going to worry about going over the scientific names, but if you can relate the scientific name to the common name. So, example, the pork tapeworm, the beef tapeworm, the broadfish tapeworm, the flea tapeworm, and the hydatid worm. These are all worms that can affect humans, or they can affect things that humans are around all the time, like beef and pork and the flea tapeworm, which actually gets into canines. So let's look at the pork tapeworm first. So because it's called the pork tapeworm, we can imagine that essentially one of the inhibitory hosts is actually going to be pigs. And so when pigs get the eggs inside of them, the eggs will travel into their muscle tissue where they'll lodge themselves and form a cyst. That cyst is then whenever you slaughter the pig and you got the pork, the eggs are in the meat. If you don't cook the meat well enough, the eggs will survive the cooking process, and then when you eat that meat, you get the eggs inside of you, and they can cause all kind of problems. So you want to make sure that whenever you eat pork, that you're cooking it to a certain temperature. You don't want to eat raw pork or undercooked pork. Same thing generally goes with beef, but most people, because beef is such a highly regulated product, that it actually you can eat it in relative safely, eat it rare and relative safely. Because it's such a highly regulated industry, we are constantly quality checking beef for presence of things like this type of tapeworm. So it would be very uncommon for a beef that goes through the industry to actually be infected. But not all beef goes through the industry. Some people have private farms. So you just got to be careful about that. Make sure you cook it. You don't have to. No one wants to eat well-cooked steak. That's just wrong. So just be careful when you are eating it. But again, here's what it looks like inside of the muscle tissue. These are the cysts that have formed. Each one of these is a little larval worm that if you were to eat and get to your system, it will turn into a big old tapeworm. So don't do that. One of the most common tapeworms out there is actually the broadfish tapeworm. If you've ever had a fish from the ocean, then you've probably had it probably has a tapeworm in it. They're that common. So same thing, the tapeworms, a larva will get inside of the fish. Once we eat it, it can get into our body. That's why it's so important to not eat fish that is undercooked. Take your chances with sushi. But most sushi, a lot of times it's steamed meat, or they do things to it to help the process. But a lot of it's not freshly caught. A lot of it is, I won't say fresh caught, it's farm raised essentially. So that way the quality is higher, and we know that it doesn't have the worm in it. But fish from the ocean, it probably has. I mean, it has it. Just go ahead and figure it out, and don't eat it raw, because the worm is actually that common. And the last one is one of the last one, but the second to last one is actually the flea tapeworm. So the flea tapeworm, the inhibitory host is a flea, and so this ends up usually being the final host as being a dog or cat. And so it has the same typical life cycle that everything else does. It's just the flea tapeworm usually infects dogs and cats. It's called a flea tapeworm because the intermediary host is a flea. Now, how does a flea tapeworm differ from the hydatid tapeworm? If you notice, there's a picture of a dog on this one. The intermediary host is not a dog or a flea in this case. It's actually a sheep. The definitive host is actually a dog, and that's where it wants to end up. But humans are often around dogs, and so sometimes we can actually get the hydatid worm. But the hydatid worm is not supposed to end up in us, and that causes some problems. Medically speaking, I would much rather have a beef tapeworm or a pork tapeworm before I'd ever want to have a hydatid tapeworm, because hydatid tapeworms can quite literally kill you. The worm, when it gets into a human system, can end up almost anywhere in our system. Once it's in a dog, it doesn't pretty much go anywhere. It generally ends up usually in the intestines. in the digestive tract someplace. But in us, it can go pretty much anywhere, and that causes problems. For example, down here on the bottom, this person has a hydatid worm. It has lodged in the muscle tissue, or the muscle tissue, or the epidermis, the skin tissue, around this person's elbow, and it's the little cyst that is there is an irritant to your system. So your body responds by swelling the area around it, so that way it's less of an irritant. But that forms a mass, and it's not water. It's not like liquid in there. It's probably got some liquid in it, but it's also probably just a mass of tissue that is wrapped around this worm. And you can see it here, it's being surgically removed. And on the upper pictures, and it just happens for this poor individual, that the worm got into the blood system, the little cyst got into the blood system, and it was pumped up into the brain, and where it lodged, and same thing happened. The body recognizes the irritant. You start surrounding it with a protective layer, and it started growing a huge cyst in this person's brain and killed him. So these worms can actually be pretty bad. Here's what it looks like. Here's the suckers on this side. This is all reproductive stuff on the bottom. It lacks a digestive system because it just feeds off the nutrients that are in your body as they wash past. It just diffuses them in.